Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining. I'm Sue Spinner, the Chief Marketing Officer at Knoa. On behalf of all of us here, we want to thank you for joining and welcome you to our Reinvent Your Oracle Siebel implementation webinar today. Oracle Siebel is an important product to all of us, and we are pleased to be supporting the broader Siebel ecosystem in the first of many webinars. Today's session will bring into focus the state of Siebel today, best practices for upgrading to OpenUI, and creative ways to maximize your Siebel investment. Our speakers have been involved in the Siebel market for some time. Bruce Daley is the founder and editor of the Siebel Observer. He writes, speaks, and consults about ways to profit from technology transitions, and will be discussing the state of Siebel today, a topic near and dear to his heart, as well as a new project he is spearheading that will benefit the broader Siebel community. Duncan Scattergood is the president of Customer Systems based in the UK and the US. Customer Systems provides connected and disconnected access to Siebel from tablets and smartphones with a highly intuitive interface that drives user adoption. And finally, Joe Negley is a solution engineer here at Knoa Software and has been working closely with Siebel customers for many years. He will be providing an in-depth overview of the user experience management. Before we get started, we want to get over a few housekeeping items. The webinar is being recorded. Your lines will all be muted during the sessions. If you would like to ask a question, please use the chat box on the right side of your screen, and we will get to as many answers as we can before the webinar ends. And we will be sending you a link with the recording of this webinar after the session for your viewing pleasure. Raise your hand if you can't see the screen or any other technical information so that we can assist. Again, thank you for joining us today, and I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, Bruce Daley.
Thank you so much, Sue. Well, I am really excited to talk to everyone this year. This webinar is really a follow-up from last year's State of Siebel 2013, and it's always good to talk about good news. Now, back in January, I wrote about the Siebel Renaissance. I said, basically, if you look at the way the pendulum's swinging in technology, I felt that there was a strong possibility that Siebel would benefit from some of the changes taking place in the business and some of the changes taking place within Oracle. And I'm happy to say that has turned out to be the case. I'd say that the difference between 2014 and 2013 is that we very much are seeing a Siebel Renaissance, and a renaissance in the sense of rebirth. While I don't think that Siebel was ever going to achieve the level of dominance over the marketplace that it achieved in the last decade, I think what we are seeing is a resurgence in interest on the part of different existing Siebel clients and new Siebel clients. Now, of course, there's bound to be some attrition, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later in this presentation. But I think the good news is if you're a Siebel professional, if you're running Siebel, if you're a partner who is developing a go-to-market strategy around Siebel, things this year in 2014 are certainly better than they were in 2013. And let's drill down into some of the specifics of that. I think one of the primary signs of rebirth is the investment that Oracle's made in their OpenUI product. This has really brought a much-needed revision to the user interface on the part of Siebel. And what I'm seeing as an independent observer is first of all, that training courses are starting to fill up with people who are interested in becoming trained and certified in Siebel OpenUI. And that's quite a good thing, because looking into the job market, what I see is a parallel demand for people with Siebel OpenUI experience. Now, Siebel OpenUI is a little bit different than other parts of Siebel, and it requires a new set of skills. It requires a knowledge of HTML. It requires a knowledge of CSS. It requires a knowledge of JavaScript. Fortunately, stepping into the breach are some of the leading Siebel bloggers, including Alex Hansel, who's in the process of writing a book about Siebel OpenUI that's going to be due later this year. So those are all signs of the rebirth. Let's take a look at the next slide, though, and talk a little bit about some of the signs of maturity. Now, clearly, the install base in Europe and North America continues to shrink. There's net attrition in terms of the number of people who are running, who are turning Siebel off, migrating to other platforms, migrating to the cloud, migrating to other programs. In cases, well, our survey results have shown that even though it's the incumbent, in a lot of cases it's become baked into the infrastructure of various organizations. A lot of other organizations are flirting or have adopted other competing CRM systems within their organization. One other sign of maturity is that people with Siebel experience continue to leave the field. I would say that based on my conversation that there's a net loss of people with Siebel experience. Now, while this is unfortunate in some respects for Siebel employers, for people with Siebel skills, that should be reflected, I would predict, in 2015 in increasing billable rates for people with Siebel background, similar to the upswing we're seeing in billable rates for people with COBOL skills. The other thing I think that's most significant in 2014 that I'm seeing is that there isn't anybody anymore who seems to be pure Siebel. Everybody, including myself, seems to have cross-specialization. And so for a career advice perspective, I think that what you're going to want to do if you're a Siebel professional is you're going to want to think about what other technologies surround Siebel, other technologies you can adopt to further round your background. And in a sense, because of where we are in 2014, I think that trend's going to continue and that there are fewer and fewer pure Siebel implementations, fewer and fewer pure Siebel people. So let's take a look now at the next slide. One thing that's really never wavered throughout this, despite all the fear, doubt, and uncertainty in the marketplace, is Oracle's continued commitment to the Siebel platform. My conversations with the product development team have convinced me that Siebel has plans at least until 2028, or Oracle has plans for Siebel at least until 2028. So the roadmap is carefully mapped out. It contains significant. I don't think there's anybody that needs to be concerned about Oracle's commitment to the product from that perspective. Now let's change pace a little bit. Let's take a look at some of the feedback I've gotten from various customers. And over the course of the past year in preparation for this webinar, I've been asking people about, customers for use of Siebel, and here are some of the results of that. I think most significant of the slides is this one, and this is how long do you plan to run your implementation? And clearly, an overwhelming number of people, well over 70%, who responded to our survey said that they plan to run Siebel as long as they possibly can. And I think that if you think about that in the context of Oracle's continuing commitment to upgrade the product, that could be for quite a long time. Now let's take a look at the next survey results, which I found pretty interesting as well, and that had to do with how hard is it to find Siebel people. And if you look at it, it's interesting that most people or most employers find it hard to very hard to find Siebel talent. Some people it's relatively easy, the results are a little spread out, but this is the reason that I think that over the next year, we're going to see an increase in the billable rates for Siebel consultants. Let's take a look now at another interesting finding, and that is how likely are you to move to the cloud? And as you can see, the respondents were really spread across the map from and it almost perfectly matches a bell curve in terms of people who are already in the cloud, people who are never going to consider the cloud, who are flirting with the idea of being in the cloud, and people who are considering it. So I think that's a pretty significant finding when you consider work map for Siebel in the future. Now, one of the things that Sue mentioned to me was that it's important that we help you. And so the way that you can help us help you is we're currently conducting another survey, and this is a survey of the Siebel community. And what we're really trying to find out is how we can provide content better to you. And specifically what we're asking is if there was a single site that you could go to where you could find all of the Siebel content and all the Siebel content that you wanted, all the Siebel content that was required for your job, would that be a benefit to you in the community? And I believe Sue will post the survey results at SurveyMonkey or the link to that to respond to that survey. Then finally, I want to encourage any of you who are going to Oracle Open World to meet with me in person. I'd obviously like to continue my research into Siebel with you as individuals. Certainly if there's anything I can do to help you in terms of provide you some insight into what I'm seeing in the Oracle space, I'd be more than happy to do that. My contact information is there on the screen. You can, probably the easiest way to reach me is to call me. I'm also going to be speaking twice at Oracle Open World. First, I'm going to be at the Customer Advisory Board Welcome Reception on Sunday afternoon. And then on Tuesday, I'm going to be speaking about the Oracle Sales Cloud and specifically about partner relationship management. And with that, I would like to turn the webinar over to my colleague, Duncan Scattergood in the UK.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. As Sue said earlier, I'm co-founder of Customer Systems, and I've worked in the Siebel space for 16 years now. And we are an expert-level Siebel consultancy and also have a product on the move for Siebel, which is the best way to deploy Siebel onto tablets, iPads, and smartphones. What I'm going to talk about today is the #1 reason that we see some organisations slowly drifting away from Siebel, and then more importantly, what we can all collectively do about that. Could you skip me forward through 2 slides, please, Sue? And one more. Perfect. So there's very broadly 2 classes of CRM implementation out there, high-value sales and everything else. So everything else includes call center, be that a sales or service call center, field service, transactional sales. And the real difference between these 2 classes is that whilst I can go and tell a call center agent to use a particular system or go find another job, nobody ever fired their best salesperson because they didn't use the CRM system. If we look at the users in that high-value sales market, they're most often the thought leaders in CRM. They were the first to adopt Siebel in the mid-90s, and they've been the first to start to drift away. Why? Well, if you speak to the salespeople, they uniformly say, Siebel, it's too hard to use. If I look at the wider Siebel market, then I have tens or hundreds of conversations every year with Siebel customers. And if you ask them, especially the IT folks, about their main pain points with Siebel, then you get quite a wide range of answers. So browser support, of which more later, complex to manage, inflexible, long release cycles, and so on. If you then say, so what do the users think? Then almost to a man and a woman, they say, Siebel, it's too hard to use. So here's the challenge, really. Organisations have invested many person-years of effort and millions of dollars in building very specific capability and best business practice into their Siebel implementations, and many of the users would like to bin it. So we need to find a way to save that investment. Have the next slide, please. Now, of course, too hard to use is a very wide statement, so we need to break that down a little bit in order to move on to solutions. So let's take a look at some of the most important factors in turn. So one, Siebel looks complex and it isn't always obvious what to do next. 20 years ago, people expected to go on a course to learn how to use a new application, but today their expectations are set by the fact they can download an app from their favourite app store and start using it immediately. And when I sign on to Siebel, be that high interactivity or open UI, then I'm confronted with a huge range of menu options. And once I select an option, typically it gets worse. So in theory, whilst we have something that's immensely powerful and flexible with multiple subtly different ways of achieving the same thing, in practice for Joe or Josephine user, it's just confusing a lot of the time. 2, and this is kind of related but separate. The application often doesn't guide people through processes terribly well. So often to complete a simple transaction, the user's got to navigate through half a dozen or more views. This is inefficient and introduces a training and support overhead, obviously. Features such as Smart Script and task-based UI have existed for many years, but haven't really helped because their inherent lack of flexibility has made IT departments reluctant to implement them. Third, it's not always available at the right place at the right time. This obviously doesn't apply to everyone, but if I'm a salesperson and I need to boot up my PC to enter a 10-word note about a call that I've just made, rather than tap the detail into my phone or tablet, then that's a straight convenience or ease of use issue. 4, and finally, performance. All too often we can still come across situations where certain key and frequent actions in Siebel take 10 to 15 seconds plus, and today people wouldn't consider that acceptable in a phone app, so why should they in Siebel? Next slide, please. So now we understand the problem in a little bit more detail. Let's move on to solution. Unconventionally, I'm going to start with something that's not the solution, at least in its purest form, which is OpenUI. Now, I don't want you to get me wrong here. OpenUI is a very good thing, and I'm a great admirer of many aspects of what Siebel has done. But to be 100% clear about the fundamental problem that it seems to me Oracle were trying to solve, that was the problem of browser independence. So the fact that Siebel can't run in older versions on IE9 Plus or browsers such as Chrome or Firefox. Obviously, from an IT perspective, this is a major, major headache. What's really nice about Oracle's solution is that, in theory at least, all you need to do to enable OpenUI is to flick a switch on the Siebel Object Manager. And I say in theory because you do need to do a complete regression test, and you can expect to have to do some rework, encounter a few things that aren't fully supported yet, especially if you're using some of the more esoteric ActiveX controls or built-out extensive client-side integration. So by switching on OpenUI, what we fundamentally get is the traditional Siebel user interface running in a modern browser, and there's nothing wrong at all with that. But what it does mean is that addressing the browser issue isn't quite the same as addressing the ease of use issue and eliminating the user complaints I've been talking about. So what do we need to do to fix ease of use and protect our large investments in business process and integration? Well, the first thing to say is there's no silver bullet, and a variety of techniques are required for a complete solution. And obviously, the appropriate combination of approaches is going to vary on a case-by-case basis. But let's look at the 4 challenges I highlighted and discuss some of the options in turn. So again, next slide, please. So challenge 1, which was fundamentally too many options in the UI. Well, a natural and in many ways appropriate first reaction is to use the technical capabilities of OpenUI to build a simplified user interface from the ground up, removing as we go a lot of the Siebel clutter, and at the same time creating something in line with the latest web and mobile design best practices. And this is perfectly possible. There's just a number of cautions that I would suggest you think about in advance. Firstly, and really just building on a point Bruce made a couple of minutes ago, the skills involved have now moved well beyond a traditional skill set to include HTML5, CSS and JavaScript. As with many things, it's possible to make a mess pretty quickly with these technologies if you don't know what you're doing. And the other thing I'd say is, from what we see, the plan of some organisations of having separate Siebel and web developers doesn't seem to work out very well in practice. So you need people who are expert in both, and currently that's a very rare skill set. You also need to be quite careful about your application architecture. So one quite nice thing about OpenUI is that you can write client-side JavaScript to tweak the HTML immediately prior to display. So an example of this would be to color code the cells in a list applet based on data values, which is something that could deliver value in certain situations. The trap that we see people falling into with this is trying to extend that technique to major restructuring of the HTML to deliver a radically different Siebel UI. And this leads to lots of complex JavaScript, which is slow, tends to not be very robust, and can be inflexible from a maintenance standpoint. So a better approach is to build out very simple web templates on the Siebel server to represent your new simplified structure. And this means that any client-side OpenUI JavaScript is also going to be simple, and simple means fast, robust, and flexible. The flip side of that recommendation is that the fact you've built out new web templates also means you're going to have to rebuild out your applets and views and so on in Siebel tools. However, given part of the complexity problem is that I very often see people have configured absolutely ludicrous number of fields into a single view in Siebel, then maybe that's an opportunity to solve the same that sub-problem at the same time. And I guess with all of this, my fundamental point is to go down this road is a big undertaking because you need to define both the UI framework and then implement it for your particular configuration. So you need to be aware of what you're getting into. An alternative would be to use a pre-built UI framework, and they exist both on top of and external to OpenUI that's been defined by somebody else. Obviously, in that instance, you need to be satisfied about the fundamental UI that you're buying into, the technology, and indeed the effort involved in exposing your own Siebel configuration. So can I have the next slide, please? Moving on to our second challenge, lack of support for process. Actually, the bottom line is it's always been possible to configure Siebel to provide reasonable process support. The challenge has been that most people haven't really had the capability to sympathetically flex Siebel to take out the excess navigation, keystrokes and mouse clicks. And often attempts to do this have been attempted with poor configuration techniques, and which have led to poor performance and robustness. Applications that people have described as over-configured or customized. So why is that the case? Well, many so-called Siebel experts aren't really that expert. One of the issues with Siebel is there's a relatively high bar of expertise required to configure it. Below the bar, and people just make a mess. Above the bar, and they will be literally 20 times more efficient than those beneath it. But if you combine decent analysis, knowledgeable Siebel configurator, and some visual clues such as the customer systems taskbar shown here, then supporting process flow in Siebel really should be one of the easier parts of the jigsaw to solve. Next slide, please. So challenge 3 was device access, i.e. accessing Siebel from devices other than a PC, so typically tablets and smartphones regardless of location. There's a number of products out there that claim to address that need. However, I want to go straight into sales mode for a moment and say that if you've got a problem that needs this as a solution, you really do need to be speaking to us about On the Move for Siebel, because I truly believe it's the best solution out there. So first, it's really, really simple to use, and there's situations where users have started successfully using Siebel via this product with no training at all. Second, it's got connected and disconnected modes, both of which are well proven and referenceable at major corporations. Third, it's an add-on to Siebel, so there's no additional servers, products, or integration points. Fourthly, it works very well with OpenUI, but also older versions of Siebel. And fifth, it can be implemented and configured to your own requirements really fast, so typically 20 to 70 days, and you can do that with traditional Siebel skills. So there's no need to learn HTML5, CSS, or JavaScript. As an aside, you can also deploy On the Move to the PC desktop to address the excessive clutter and too many options problem. And if you want to learn more and register for a demo, then just Google On the Move for Siebel and you'll find your way to our website. Can I have the next slide, please? The final challenge I mentioned was performance. and the basics of solving Siebel performance is a 30-minute webinar in its own right. However, our experience is that people try almost everything without challenging themselves about the real root cause in these situations. Obviously, these performance problems come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, but a classic example is a slowly performing SQL statement, and the normal attempt to address it is to do something in the database layer, rather than doing the right thing, which is to fix whatever is in the Siebel configuration that's causing the inefficient SQL statement to be generated in the first instance. So why do people make these mistakes? Well, it comes back to the point I was making earlier about the basic bar of competence actually being quite high for Siebel compared to certain other products. Unfortunately, many of the people out there claiming expertise are actually beneath the bar. So let's move on to my final slide, please. Oh, yeah, fine, okay. So just to conclude, and I think I'm just about in my time slot, ultimately, if a system doesn't deliver what the users or their managers want, it's going to die. The type of user is going to determine how long that process will take, but it is a fundamental truth. Users want many things, but ease of use is one of them and probably the most important. And consumer-facing touchscreen apps tell them that ease of use is possible, and possible today. Ease of use isn't quite the same thing as visual elegance. For better or for worse, Salesforce.com has the reputation for being easy, but let's be honest, it's hardly a thing of beauty. Finally, it's perfectly possible to achieve that ease of use in Siebel today, and by doing so, you'll have an enterprise-grade system and extend your investments in license configuration and integration. So with that thought, thank you for your time, and I will hand you over to Joe.
Thank you, Duncan, and thank you, Bruce. You can go ahead to the next slide, please. So just talking about the Knoa strategy, how do we fit into the picture with the Siebel implementers in the Oracle landscape? What Knoa is seeking to do is really to document the customer journey. Delivering exceptional customer experience is job one for most call center and services organizations. So how do you improve on the customer experience within Siebel? Companies need to be able to access and analyze data that can actually help them understand where they're doing well, where they're not doing so well. And what we often bring up with our customers about the Siebel experience is how can you improve on it without being able to measure it? And that's where Knoa's strategy comes into the equation. Next slide, please. So some key Siebel CRM objectives, and these are pretty common throughout the industry. Improving those CRM KPIs such as call handle time and improving customer satisfaction. So ultimately, we're trying to help you improve the performance of your call centers to drive up the satisfaction of your customers, those people who call into your call centers, who have an issue, who have a request. We want to help your people utilizing Siebel get better at what they do so that your customers can receive better service. We also look to reduce costs during major releases and upgrades, and we'll talk about this more in detail in terms of the open UI landscape. Improving usability and reducing the complexity of the user interface is also a goal. Improving adoption. Adoption is a big buzzword across, the entire software landscape. And what we try to highlight is that the objective is to give you the ability to measure that, because oftentimes adoption is kind of a concept and not something you can really kind of capture. In addition to improving adoption, we also want to assure all CRM functionality is being leveraged to its maximum ability. So you maximize that return on investment that you've made in something like a Siebel application. We also want to objectively determine whether experienced issues, things like errors within Siebel, are caused by a user or by a, directly caused by a process or attributable to technology, and to be able to make the distinction between those. We also want to validate and improve planning for workflow changes. So again, a sustainability model to help you improve and continue to improve over time. Next slide, please. So how to justify open UI. It's often something that's being pondered by companies who are utilizing Siebel, considering moving to that next level. What can the Knoa UEM product deliver? What we're going to enable you to do is quickly justify the open UI business case through user experience analytics. So when you're analyzing a user interface, what better way to justify that by gathering actual user experience metrics? We help you determine the most cost-effective functionality to target for migration. And we're able to do that by showing you specifically utilization time for each user, for the application, for each screen, all the views and applets within those Siebel applications. We can show you true utilization metrics for each and every one of them. Customizations can often be eliminated. Sometimes customizations come up as a kind of a user request that wasn't clearly well thought out. And even though the customization can be implemented initially, oftentimes it doesn't end up being adopted long term. Any underutilized customizations can be eliminated moving forward to OpenUI. You can also identify users and groups who would most benefit from an enhanced user experience. Being able to see through objective metrics which users are struggling, where they're struggling, and have a very clear picture of what users need to have their experience lifted through the OpenUI experience. We provide baseline metrics both pre and post UI, so we can monitor the Siebel application today, and we can also monitor it moving forward to OpenUI. And we're also going to deliver the ability to reduce costs associated with those major releases and upgrades, basically reducing risk during those change management events. Next slide, please. Overall, the goal, everybody's goal, including ours, is to improve the Siebel CRM experience. And there's several different areas within that experience that kind of contributes to the overall picture to improvement. Continuous improvement on the top left, you can see, by eliminating keystrokes and creating more efficiencies, improving that call handle time that we talked about, increasing customer satisfaction. All these things will improve the overall experience and drive more ROI from that Siebel application. By monitoring that end user performance, getting true objective data, charting the user experience, it gives you deeper insight to improve, again, the Siebel experience overall. In the user support areas, when you have a high volume of tickets or help desk tickets that are caused by end user behavior, the ability to get detail about that particular issue on a global scope will give you the ability to reduce the total volume of tickets. And it will also enable you to reduce the time it takes to find that missing information. So being able to see in-depth metrics about the user experience will improve the user support structure by driving down the time it takes to triage and resolve a user-reported issue. On the right-hand side, user onboarding, high turnover for call center representatives, and some of them are not provisioned or trained properly. That user onboarding process becomes more efficient and more streamlined by in-depth metrics to the UI. The user experience and user proficiency also will be lifted up collectively, and driving up user satisfaction is kind of a ripple effect both for the call center agents and for the customers reporting issues to them. Next slide, please. So how does the Knoa solution work? The patented agent technology follows an individual user's activity in real time as they work on their desktop applications. So in Siebel, in OpenUI, when that solution is implemented, we will collect information from the individual user level and then aggregate that into actionable data. The Big Data Analytics Framework analyzes massive amounts of information from the application events, hourly, daily, weekly, screen by screen, user by user, and again, presents that in dashboards and reports that are either executive or role-based or functional information is presented on all the data gathered, and it makes it easy to interpret the results. Next slide, please. So who benefits from the user information that we're gathering? These four pillars are basically the core areas where you will see the most benefit: call center operations, change management, help desk training and education. And the bullet points listed within each of these are typical use cases or value areas that can be realized from utilizing the solution. In the call center, we're going to enable you to increase the efficiencies of your call center representatives, identifying bottlenecks within a process workflow and the ability to improve that consequently. Standardize call flows by seeing exactly how the individual user workflows are moving through the system. And again, measure adoption of custom screens, standard screens, views, and applets. In the change management area, it will allow you to blueprint usability initiatives, again, simplify workflows, enable faster response, and increasing the user satisfaction of both the call center reps and the customers who they're talking to. The help desk model will actually be transformed, and you'll be able to now deliver proactive support as opposed to purely 100% reactive support. The ability to see all the user issues, all the errors out there in the landscape, not just the ones that are reported, will allow you to eliminate recurring issues, reduce that ticket volume for the help desk, and minimize disruptions during upgrades. And finally, in training and education, thank you. So in training and education, we'll be able to test training effectiveness. We'll be able to assess where training needs exist and deliver targeted training as a result, and then track the efficiency and the effectiveness of that training over time. Next slide. So to summarize what the solution does, and after this I'm going to present an actual demo of the solution, we want to objectively represent the state of user adoption and sister performance. We're going to identify user and application performance issues, understand what went wrong and who was affected, compare the user performance against baselines, so compare today versus tomorrow, the go live 6 months ago versus how we are today. Train specific users on best practices, and again, track the effectiveness of that training over time. Keep a sustainable training model active. Improve applications based on usage patterns. Resolve support issues faster with workflow tracking. And strategize and prioritize with information tracked over time. Obviously, you can visit the Knoa website for further information, but at this point, I'd also like to show you the solution in a short demonstration. So this is one of the first areas we wanted to highlight as far as what we can capture and what we can present as usable information from the solution. So keep in mind, this solution is gathering information from each individual Siebel user. Each one of your call center agents or Siebel users will utilize the solution during the day, and we'll capture information as we listen to their activity and then present it in actionable data, which you'll see in some of these reports and dashboards. This is one of the first metrics we capture, which is presented in the activity dashboard. It's utilization. So how much time were the end users spending within a Siebel application, or in some cases you can see some other applications which might be monitored by our solution. In this case, there's an SAP one listed, but we're going to focus on Siebel. We can actually show you true adoption, and this is going to lead to several benefits. By seeing this here, we can identify, okay, for the last 2 weeks, this is an aggregate report, 2 weeks worth of data. I can see now that my Siebel application has been utilized for over 500 hours by 50 users. I can also see this broken down on an individual screen level. So this becomes that usability improvement roadmap. Moving forward, if you're thinking about utilizing OpenUI and moving to that new interface, this is essentially your roadmap. This is what's going to be utilized most by your users if you're monitoring pre-upgrade to OpenUI. This will tell me exactly which screens and which functionality are utilized by my Siebel users, and what do I need to carry forward? What information, what application usage do I need to maintain over time? And then consequently, after OpenUI has been brought in, you can monitor that during the testing process and then post-go live as well to get additional metrics to compare the before and after. So as I mentioned before, you'll have a static baseline from the pre-upgrade, and then you'll be able to compare that to the new information post-upgrade. We capture all this again, from the user desktop level, so all the transactional activity, all the screens, applets or views, you'll have all this information, and then we can break it down to see more individual points of information through what we call user attributes. For each end user, you'll have several user attributes associated with them to give me some additional insight to slice and dice this data. So tell me, where are my particularly high volume activity locations in this case? I have high volume activity in Chicago and San Antonio. But I can also identify areas where there's a lack of adoption in certain locations, where I need to lift up my user base because they're having some sort of an issue adopting the solution. In addition to that, you can see there's large volume areas of activity in the heat map here, but in the lower right, you can see some smaller areas where we can exploit the information to tell us where the lack of adoption might be. And this is, again, giving us insights that we can prioritize which functionality is moved forward. When you're thinking about moving to OpenUI or simply even adding a new functionality or enhancing functionality in the original Siebel interface, you really want to identify whether or not that's highly utilized functionality, as opposed to something that could potentially be retired and not moved forward during the upgrade. So once you've actually used that information, you can reduce the Siebel footprint again and improve the usability by sunsetting objects that are no longer used. And again, that's going to drive up the end user experience and the user satisfaction consequently. We capture 100% of activity from all the applications, screens, and users. And again, this is done automatically. Again, this information we presented out of the box. So none of what you're seeing here as far as the metrics is customized. This is all out of the box functionality. Simply turn on the UAM solution and monitor the users, and you'll have this information right away. You also have the ability to see trends over time, to see whether or not utilization or activity is going up or going down. So again, real objective way to measure that adoption picture, which is kind of previously difficult to quantify with solutions that are not like this one, where we're monitoring at the end user level. Moving to some additional functionality of the UAM solution, we also capture errors. So we're able to identify, after we've kind of clarified what the adoption is and where the adoption gaps are, we want to understand where Siebel users are struggling with the interface. Where are they experiencing more pain, less pain? And again, this is going to be a very objective view. It's not necessarily what's being reported to the help desk or to the super users or to the executive teams that manage the solution. Since we capture 100% of the errors within the interface, we don't need to rely on a reactive mode that's simply looking at the number of help desk tickets where people have run into problems. We can again capture this through a variety of points of aggregation. We can look at individual transactions, or we can look at individual messages themselves to show me which are the errors that are most prevalent through my Siebel community, and are they affecting a high volume of users. This is, again, the ability to proactively measure and then proactively address a problem collectively, so that if there's something like an authorization issue, I'm clicking on one of those examples here. Authorization issues happened over 100 times and affected 16 users. This could be a role-based, permission-based type of error where I can actually fix this, and it will affect a high volume of end users and, again, drive up their productivity and their user satisfaction. We can actually drill into all of these individual metrics to see more detail about where the process and where the user experience is breaking down. We have the integrated user attributes, again, on the right-hand side, and you can see these highlighted in the pie chart on the right-hand side. For this authorization issue, you can see I have almost 50% of the errors related to that particular issue are within my San Antonio location. So this is one way I can prioritize where my resolution and where my resources will go to fix the problem that exists out there. I can also look at the individual end users at the bottom of the list to see which are the users most highly affected or have the most pain in this specific area. We can drill into that. If I looked at a particular user, I can see a specific user with a high volume of activity or high volume of errors, and I can drill into their individual metric to see, okay, what are the errors and where is this user experiencing more pain? With this information, I can see authorization issues for one user that's happening repeatedly, and I can drill into his individual workflow based on that. Now, since we want to focus on some Siebel errors, I switched to a different summary report to kind of highlight that. And again, I can show you my entire group of Siebel users in one location and the volume of activity and the volume of errors affecting them. So again, we can get deep insight with just a couple of clicks to see what the user experience is like so that we can move towards improving that. I have several users here with a high volume of issues. I can also switch this view to show me the individual error messages themselves to, again, identify where the major problems exist and who are the users who are affected by it. You can see here I have 200 errors where it looks like it's a simple data entry issue, and it's affecting 15 users in this case. Let me make the view a little bit bigger so it's a little bit clearer on the WebEx. Sorry about that. Now we can see we have data entry issues for 15 users. This is probably a simple training issue. It could also be a process issue, but it won't take very long to kind of get to the root cause, to identify what the problem is and to move towards resolution. And since this is affecting a high volume of users, it's something that I want to move up in my priority list. Looking down the list here, I have some wrong field values or value types detected in a specific screen. And even though this is, again, a relatively high volume area, 35 user errors over the last 2 weeks, it's only affected 2 users in this case. Now, I have identified 2 users who are struggling, and what we can probably do is just make a quick investigation and deliver targeted training to those 2 users. But on the priorities scale, we do not need to necessarily move towards resolving this faster than an issue that's affecting a higher volume of users. I can drill into that to see some more detail about those individual messages themselves and the users who were affected. And each one of these will have a link to the end user workflow. Okay, so for an individual user in Siebel, I have information about the screen they were accessing and the raw error messages that affected them when they had the problem. And now I have a link to the workflow to show me specifically what the problem was and the context around the issue. Let me make this view a little bit better here. This workflow view is available for each and every end user. Any point in time, it's actually available in near real time. So as long as it takes the user to execute the workflow, it will take a mere seconds for it to be uploaded to the reporting console where it can be accessed. So the workflow is unique to Knoa. It's one of the pieces of our solution that really isn't available out there through any other monitoring solution. Provides a step-by-step view. So you see the error message as well as the context, and we have a clear-cut view of the end user's workflow, the steps they took, the screens they accessed. You can see the panels, the applets, the views, all easy to interpret for someone in a help desk or a training role. So for benefits, we can actually utilize this for process improvement. We can utilize this to aid with training to help a user refine what they were doing when we've identified some sort of a gap in the process that they're executing that can be corrected with training. For user support, think about how it took me just a couple of clicks and only a couple minutes to get to this point, whereas in a typical reactive mode, you're looking for screenshots and you're asking a lot of questions, and there's a lengthy interrogation of the individual end user. That's all eliminated, and the time it takes to triage and resolve a specific reported issue is now much more efficient, much faster, and it will enable the support teams to do a lot more, resolve tickets faster, and again, eliminate recurring issues, thus driving support costs down. The clear picture of the actual executed workflow is a very easy to interpret view here, and can also be utilized during that migration to OpenUI. To see this in a testing scenario will identify easily the steps that are required to go through a specific process. And again, that process can be refined when you think about moving from the UAT phase to the go live phase. I'll just scroll down here so that we can see some additional detail You can see operations. So each and every click, each and every activity that the user accessed, all the screens and the duration of the time spent on each screen, all the messages that they interpret. So any error messages, you'll be able to see those very easily in this view. As I scroll down, you can see some more operations. And we can filter this very easily if we're looking for specific information. So again, someone in a support or a training role can boil down the information to show me specifically if I'm looking for individual errors. I can simply click a couple of filters, and I now have the error that kind of led us to this individual user's workflow, and we can work towards resolving the issue for that individual. Moving to the next area, we also have the ability to provide metrics around specific business processes, and this is an example of that, the Business Process KPI Dashboard. This actually summarizes a lot of the functionality of the UEM solution. This is actually going to show me a way to connect the business with the IT department by showing actual metrics. These business processes are actually conceptual processes that have been developed by the business side. And what we're going to do is mirror them in the solution so that you can see metrics specific to a process. Total amount of active time, number of active users, average response time, number of operations or clicks, errors related to user errors and system errors. And we want to compare them, again, baseline versus point in time today, so that you can see a delta between the two, how often things are improving, are there areas that need more improvement versus less. So you can drill down into each one of these processes again to see individual metrics and see individual trends to show me how are things performing over time. Are errors becoming more or less frequent related to a specific process? So again, track effectiveness, track user proficiency related to a specific process that's key to your Siebel business. This clear visibility into errors, to response time, to application adoption metrics is some of the best benefits of the Knoa solution. And again, establishing a baseline and trends will allow you to move forward to maximize the investment in a Siebel application or moving forward to the open UI world. These are some of the unique features. We have many more that are available and love to talk to you about them moving forward. So you can please contact Knoa if you have further questions. At this point, I'll wrap up the demo and I'll turn it back over to Sue and our marketing team, but thank you everyone for your attention.
Thanks very much, Joe. That was great, and thank you to all the panelists. We have a couple of questions that came in, and if anybody has any additional questions, please feel free to ask them right now in your chat window. The first question is, many of the major Siebel implementation supporters are moving to cloud solutions. Do you think that others will follow the same suit? Duncan, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, sure. So I take it by implementation supporters, we're talking about partner organisations. I think, as Bruce indicated, you know, some people are becoming more agnostic. If I can, and I really can't speak for the whole market, but if I speak for customer systems, we certainly feel very loyal to the Siebel market. And whilst it's not impossible that we'd add something else in the medium term if that's where the market took us, it's we're not decommitting from Siebel in any way. And I think the commercial realities behind this, if there's a significant number of user organisations generating demand for Siebel experts and Siebel partners, then I'd suggest simple economics means organisations will choose to fill that void.
Thanks, Duncan.
I don't know if Bruce wants to comment on that as well.
Well, I was going to say, Duncan, that from my perspective, I think we all need to have a little change in perspective. if you have a data center or you have a phone that's connected, then you're in the cloud already. So what I would say really is that you're going to be subject to cloud standards such as compliance in existing Siebel implementations and implementations that are co-located and implementations that Oracle hosts. You're still going to be under the same requirements. So I would say that in a sense, we all live in the cloud today. We just don't all recognize it.
No, I'd completely agree with that. But I suppose I was taking a software as a service model as opposed to cloud, which is of course a much wider thing, as you just point out there.
I think so. Another question that has to do with some of the economics that you guys were just talking about. If I have Siebel skills, what are my prospects to continue earning a good living from them? Bruce, would you like to handle that?
Sure, although I'd be interested to see what Duncan thinks as well. I would say that your prospects for earning a good living really have to do with how old you are. If you're 20 years old, it might be a stretch, but if you're older than 40, I believe that you can retire on your Siebel skills. Now, you may need to augment them, and I think a good way to augment them is to become a subject matter expert in the business or industry that you happen to support. Another direction you can take it is in the direction of operations and learning more about the operating system or the database. And the third area, and probably one of the most promising areas, is to learn about all the products that are being built around Siebel. So Oracle has a whole CX strategy that involves using the product that they bought when they bought Right Now for service, buying Marketing Cloud. I think that if you augment your Siebel skills to something else, I'm confident that just as people with COBOL skills are now in demand, you'll be in demand for the rest of your life. But I'm interested to see what Duncan thinks.
I broadly support that. I think the thing I would add to that is people who are good at Siebel, in my experience, have built broader skill sets that are very easily transferable. So just hanging your skill set on, I can only do Siebel configuration, I think is quite a narrow way of looking at things, because if you've been involved in a number of Siebel implementations, presumably you've, for example, built domain knowledge around particular vertical markets, and there's transferability there as well.
All right, and the final question to the panelists: what do you think the impact of Larry Ellison stepping down as CEO how that might impact the Siebel business?
I'll be honest, I've not got an opinion on that one, so I'll duck it.
Oh, good, because I've got a strong opinion about that. My opinion is that it's really a non-event. That Larry Ellison is still there, and he's still as influential as he ever was. And the only change is now Safra and Mark Hurd don't report directly to Larry. Otherwise, it's really no change. So I think it's really a non-event.
And Sue, this is Joe.
Yeah, Joe, go ahead. You can answer the question. Yeah, would you answer that? Would you read it and answer it?
Sure. Another question more on the technical side. Monitoring the application, the Siebel application from the demo, does it affect performance of the production server, and how long does the process take? Quick answer is no. So the touch point at the user level means that there's no integration with the Siebel application at all. The Knoa architecture is independent, so it does not impact application performance. The information for the reports is available depending on how often you aggregate the data in the historical reports. Like, for example, I was showing reports for 2 weeks worth of data. That's typically aggregated every hour, but the data from the individual users is collected in real time. So something like the workflow will be available only moments after the users have executed it.
Thank you, Joe. That's all the questions that we have for now.
Sue, I saw one or two privately directed at me, but I will respond to people offline.
Okay, we have, okay, I see the question for you. Thank you, Mark, for that question. So we have no other questions at this time, and I just want to thank everybody for joining today. We will be sending out a link to the webinar for anybody who would like to see it again, or for you to send to your colleagues. All of us are available, as the panelists gave you contact information. So if you have any questions or comments, please get in touch with us. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and goodbye.